Snow was falling on Wabash Avenue the night. A tired ER nurse knelt over a dying boy and dialed the only number tucked inside his coat. And without knowing it, she pulled the most feared man in Chicago straight out of the shadows and into her life. She thought she was calling a worried father. She had no idea she was waking a wolf. If stories about ordinary people who stumble into a world they were never supposed to see keep you up at night, do yourself a favor right now. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell, because this one does not let go until the very last second. Her name was Hannah Vale, and at 26 she already moved through the world like someone who had stopped expecting it to be kind. She had just walked out of Mercy General after a 13-hour shift in the emergency department, the kind of shift that leaves a person hollow, where 2 car wrecks and a cardiac arrest blur together into a single long hum of monitors and bad coffee. Her scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic. In the pocket of her thin gray coat sat $41 and a final notice from her landlord, folded into a square small enough to pretend it wasn't there. The radiator in her studio apartment on the south side had been dead since the first week of December, and Christmas was 11 days away, and Hannah Vale had long since stopped hoping for anything except getting home, getting warm, and sleeping until her next shift swallowed her again. Chicago at 1 in the morning was a different animal than the postcard the tourists bought. The wind came off the lake like it had a personal grudge, knifing between the buildings, rattling the dead Christmas lights strung above a shuttered electronics store. Hannah kept her chin down and her hands jammed in her pockets, walking fast, the way you learn to walk when you're a woman alone in a cold city at the worst hour of the night. She was 3 blocks from her bus stop when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong, a thin, choking gasp half swallowed by the wind. Most people in that city would have walked faster. Hannah Vale stopped. She had spent 6 years learning to hear the exact pitch of a body in trouble, and that sound went through her like a current. She turned toward the recessed doorway of a closed pharmacy, squinting into the dark, and what she saw made her stomach drop straight through the icy pavement. A child. A boy, maybe 8 years old, slumped against the cold brick, and this was no neighborhood kid, not in that part of town. He wore a navy wool coat with hand-stitched lapels, the kind that cost more than Hannah made in 2 weeks, and little leather boots that had never once touched a salted sidewalk. His face had gone the color of ash. His lips were tinged a faint, terrible blue, and a thin line of foam clung to the corner of his mouth as his small body shuddered against the wall. Hey, buddy, look at me." Hannah was on her knees before she'd even decided to move, the snow soaking instantly through the fabric, and she didn't feel it. Her hands were already working, checking his airway, turning him gently onto his side so he wouldn't choke, 2 fingers at his throat, counting a pulse that was racing and thready all at once. Years in the ER had carved these motions into her so deep that her panic and her training ran on 2 separate tracks, one screaming, the other calm and exact. "Stay with me. Come on, kiddo. Stay with me." The boy couldn't answer. His eyes had rolled back, only the whites showing. She dug through the small leather satchel, still looped over his shoulder, searching for an EpiPen, an inhaler, a medical bracelet, anything that would tell her what was killing him. Her fingers closed instead around something cold and heavy, a sleek black phone, far too expensive and far too encrypted for any child to own. A slip of cream-colored cardstock was tucked behind its case, the handwriting on it elegant and old-fashioned. "If something is ever wrong, call this number first. Always first. Papa." Below it, 10 digits and nothing else. Hannah's own phone was already pressed to her ear. Her cracked screen lit blue against the dark, and she dialed 911 before she'd finished reading the card. Ambulance, cross streets, child in respiratory distress, possible overdose, hurry. Then, because the boy's pulse was failing and she had run out of better ideas, she grabbed the black phone and dialed the only number anyone had thought to leave him. It rang exactly once. "Speak." The voice was low and unhurried, a deep gravel of a thing that seemed to come from a quieter, colder world than the one Hannah was kneeling in. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. "I found your son." She heard her own words come out steady, the way she'd say it to a doctor across a gurney, even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "He's collapsed on Wabash near Monroe. He's not breathing right. His lips are blue, He's seizing. I'm a nurse. I've already called an ambulance. But you need to know right now this looks like a poisoning, not an accident. The silence on the other end lasted half a second, and in that half a second, the temperature of the call dropped through the floor. Who is this? It wasn't a question. It was a blade. His name's on nothing in this bag, so I don't know who he is or who you are, and frankly I don't care, Hannah snapped, the exhaustion in her finally burning into something fierce. Your boy is dying on the sidewalk and I'm keeping him alive. We are going to Mercy General. If you love this kid, you'll meet us there. And she hung up before he could answer, because the boy had just gone still under her hands, and that mattered more than anything a stranger could say. 11 miles away, in a private room above a members-only club off Rush Street, a man named Damon Castellano slowly lowered a phone from his ear, and every other sound in the room died. He was the head of the Castellano organization, and there was no softer way to say what that meant. He had inherited an empire built on fear and grown it with a patience that frightened even the men who served him. He wore his power the way other men wore overcoats, easily, without thinking about it. At that table sat the underboss of an Albanian crew that had been carving into Castellano territory along the docks. 3 of their men ranged behind him, with their hands a little too close to their jackets. Damon's own people lined the walls. A negotiation had been underway. Money had been on the table. None of it existed anymore. He stood. His eyes, a flat winter gray, swept the room and registered none of it. Elias is at Mercy General, he said to no one and to everyone. Get the car, boss. His right hand, a broad and quiet man named Sal Moretti, stepped in close. We're in the middle of now. Damon Castellano did not raise his voice. He never had to. He reached beneath his jacket and set a heavy custom pistol flat on the table between the two sides, the steel ringing against the wood, and he looked the Albanian underboss directly in the eye. If I learn that any soul connected to you so much as breathed near my son tonight, there will not be enough of your people left to bury. We're done here. He was already walking. Sal, the car. I'm driving. What the most feared man in the city did not yet understand was that the danger had never come from across the table. It had come from inside his own house. By the time Damon Castellano arrived, the emergency wing of Mercy General had stopped feeling like a hospital and started feeling like a fault line. The automatic doors didn't so much open as surrender as he came through them, 4 men in dark coats fanning out behind him, the whole waiting room going quiet in the instinctive way a herd goes quiet when a predator walks in. Nurses froze. A security guard reached for his radio and thought better of it. Damon's eyes moved across the room once and locked onto the only person in it, who looked like she'd been dragged out of the cold and through a war. A young woman in soaked scrubs and a thin gray coat, a smear of dried blood on her sleeve, sitting very straight in a plastic chair with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she wasn't drinking. He crossed to her in 4 long strides. You made the call. It wasn't gratitude. It was an interrogation. Hannah Vale stood up. She was 5'4" and bone-tired, and the man in front of her was a wall of dark wool and contained violence, and a more sensible person would have shrunk. She didn't. She'd spent 13 hours that day holding her ground against death itself, and she had nothing left in her with which to be afraid of a stranger in an expensive coat. Yes, she said. I called you. He's in Trauma Bay too. The doctors are with him now, and he's still alive, which an hour ago wasn't a sure thing. She held his stare. You're welcome, by the way. Something moved behind the gray of his eyes. Not warmth, nothing so simple, but a flicker of pure surprise. No one spoke to him that way. He had built a life in which no one would dare. Sal Moretti shifted his weight just behind Damon's shoulder, his mouth tightening. You want to watch your tone, lady. You have no idea who you're talking to. I really don't care, Hannah said, not looking away from Damon. I've got a kid down the hall who almost died in a doorway in the snow, and I want to know how an 8-year-old in a $1,000 coat ends up alone on Wabash at 1 in the morning. So while everybody's busy being terrifying, maybe someone could focus on that. It was the second time in 5 minutes she had refused to be afraid of him, and Damon Castellano, who measured every person he met by how quickly they cowered, found that he did not know what to make of her at all. Before he could answer, The doors of the trauma bay swung open and a doctor stepped through, peeling off her gloves, her eyes flicking nervously across the wall of armed men before settling gratefully on the only familiar face in the room. "Hannah, there you are." Then to Damon, more carefully, "Mr. Castellano, your son is stable. We've got him breathing on his own. I'll be honest with you. If this woman hadn't found him and positioned him the way she did, and called it in as a poisoning, we'd have lost 20 minutes treating the wrong thing, and 20 minutes is more than he had." She hesitated. "There's something you need to hear, and you should hear it sitting down, except I doubt you will." "Say it." The doctor lowered her voice, though it changed nothing in a room that's silent. "We ran a full tox panel. This wasn't a seizure and it wasn't an allergy. Your son ingested a synthetic compound, engineered, not something he could have gotten into by accident. It's designed to mimic anaphylaxis. It's nearly untraceable unless you know to look for it." She met his eyes. "Mr. Castellano, your son was poisoned, deliberately." The quiet that followed had weight to it. Hannah felt the small hairs on her arms rise. She watched the man in front of her, and what she saw was worse than rage. Damon Castellano did not shout. He did not move. The air around him simply seemed to drop 10 degrees, as though all the heat had been pulled out of him and packed away somewhere it could do real harm later. "Sal," he said very softly, his eyes fixed on nothing. "Lock down the house. Every guard, every staff member, the driver, the tutor. Pull the security feeds for the last 18 hours. Nobody who was near my son today goes home tonight." He turned his head slowly, and his gaze came to rest on Hannah. "Someone got into my home. Someone walked past every man I pay to keep that from happening. And the only person standing in this hospital who I am certain had nothing to do with it is the one who shouldn't be here at all." Hannah felt the cold understanding climb up her spine of exactly how far she had just waded into something. "Okay," she said carefully, setting the paper cup down. "He's safe now. You've got him. I should go home." "You're not going home," Damon said. There was nothing cruel in it. That was what made it frightening. "Excuse me, I have a shift in 9 hours. Whoever did this failed." He said it almost gently, the way you'd explain something to someone you didn't want to terrify but couldn't afford to lie to. Failure makes people frantic. They will retrace his steps. They will pull the traffic cameras on Wabash. And what those cameras will show them is your face, leaning over a boy they tried very hard to kill. He let that settle. They will assume you saw something. They will assume he told you something, or gave you something. "From this moment, Miss Vale," she said, her voice not as steady now. "Hannah Vale, Miss Vale. From this moment in their eyes, you are a loose thread, and men like the ones who did this do not leave loose threads." He drew a phone from his coat and tapped it twice without looking down. "Give Sal your address. I'll send people to collect anything you need. You'll be safe at the house until I find the person who walked poison into my home." "You can't just take me somewhere," Hannah said, and even she could hear that the certainty had gone out of it. "I'm not taking you anywhere. I'm keeping you breathing," Damon said, and for the first time he looked at her not as a problem but as a person, something dark and unreadable in the gray of his eyes. "You saved my blood tonight. In the world I come from, that is a debt that does not get forgiven or forgotten. It gets paid. Come with me, Miss Vale. There isn't a safer place in this city than 3 feet behind me, and right now you need that more than you know." She didn't have a real choice, and they both understood it. Within the hour she was folded into the back seat of a car, so heavy with armor that the doors swung like vault doors, watching the south side blur past tinted windows she couldn't have rolled down if she'd tried. They drove in silence for a long time. Then Damon's phone buzzed once against his thigh. He answered it with a single word, listened, and Hannah watched his knuckles go white where his hand rested on the seat between them. "You're certain," he said. "Not a question." He ended the call and turned his head toward her slowly, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. "What?" she said. "What is it?" "My men reached your building 20 minutes ago." His voice was terribly calm. "Your door was already kicked in. The apartment had been torn apart. Walls, mattress, the floorboards pried up. 2 men were seen going down the back stairs 4 minutes before my people arrived." He paused. "They were looking for you, Hannah." She stopped breathing. That ugly little studio with the dead radiator was the only thing in the world that had been hers, and if she had taken the bus the way she did every other night of her life, she would have walked through that door at exactly the wrong moment. "I don't have anything," she whispered. "I swear to God, I don't have anything anyone would want." "You have your life," Damon Castellano said, and then he did something that surprised them both. He reached over and brushed a tear from the edge of her jaw with the side of a calloused thumb, a touch absurdly gentle for a man carved out of stone. "And as of tonight, keeping it is my responsibility. Welcome to the family, Miss Vale, whether you wanted it or not." The Castellano estate sat behind iron gates on the North Shore, a low fortress of stone and glass watched over by cameras that saw in the dark and men who patrolled its grounds, with rifles slung casually across their chests. Hannah had never in her life seen wealth like it standing still, so close she could touch it. She was given a guest suite on the third floor larger than her entire former building. With a bed she sank into like a stone into water, and a window that looked out over the black, churning expanse of Lake Michigan. She did not sleep. She lay awake listening to a house that never fully went quiet, and she thought about a little boy's blue lips, and about how thin the line had turned out to be between her ordinary, exhausting life and this. Below her, the Don turned his study into a war room, and did not sleep either. One by one, everyone who had been within reach of Elias Castellano that day was brought in and questioned. The groundskeeper, the cook, the tutor, the two drivers. Damon sat behind a broad oak desk with the encrypted phone, his son carried, turned over in his hands, his face an unreadable mask, while beside him stood the one man in the world he had never once thought to doubt, Gregory Hale, the family's consigliere, his father's man before he was his own. A tall, silver-haired figure in a charcoal suit with a lawyer's careful hands and 40 years of loyalty behind him. "The compound is exotic," Gregory said quietly, polishing his glasses on a pocket square. "Our contact at the lab confirms it. A plant-derived alkaloid, heavily refined. Whoever made it knew exactly what they were doing. It would have been introduced orally, several hours before symptoms. Almost certainly while Elias was on his way to his afternoon lesson downtown." He shook his silver head slowly. "Whoever did this had access, Damon. Real access. This was not a stranger climbing a fence, Thomas." Damon's voice was flat. "The afternoon driver. I'm sorry to say I was grave. Sal found him an hour ago in the trunk of his own car near the rail yards. One round, back of the head, clean. The kind of work you pay a great deal of money for." He sighed. "They took Thomas. They took the car, and somewhere in that window they took your son. And then, for reasons I confess I can't fathom, they left him alive in a doorway with the one phone that would call you. That's the part that doesn't sit right," Sal Moretti said, from across the room, pacing the length of the rug. "If this were the Albanians, or the Morettis muscling in, they'd have sent the boy back to us in pieces and a note. Why poison him quiet, dump him careful, and leave the phone? That's not a war move. That's a message," Damon said, very low, still turning the dark phone over in his hands. "They didn't want a war. They wanted me broken. They wanted my son dead in my arms, and they wanted me to hear it happen down a phone line, helpless, the most powerful man in this city unable to lift a finger." His eyes were chips of ice. "This is not territory. This is personal. This is someone close enough to know exactly where it would hurt." 2 days crawled by in the gilded house, and Hannah Vale moved through them like a ghost in borrowed clothes. Designer outfits appeared in the closet in her size. Warm, beautiful meals arrived at her door. She was not permitted past the 3rd floor, and she had never in her life been so comfortable and so trapped at once. She missed the diner coffee at the nurse's station. She missed the chaos of the ER, the only place she had ever felt she truly belonged. She missed being no one in particular in a world that didn't watch her every move. Everything changed on the 3rd morning, with a knock so soft she almost missed it. When she opened the door, Elias Castellano was standing in the hall, pale and small and clutching a worn stuffed fox, flanked by 2 enormous men who clearly had no idea how to stand near a child. He looked up at her with his father's gray eyes, except his were still soft. "Are you the lady who found me?" he asked. "Papa said an angel found me in the snow." Something cracked open in Hannah's chest. She knelt down to his level the way she did with frightened kids in the ER. "I'm no angel, buddy. I'm just Hannah. I'm so glad you're feeling better. You scared me half to death, you know that? He stepped forward and wrapped his thin arms around her neck and held on, and Hannah held him back fiercely, and in that moment she understood completely why a man like Damon Castellano would burn a city down for this. I was really scared, Elias mumbled into her shoulder. The new Dr. Man smelled funny, like the almonds in Grandma's cookies, but wrong. He gave me a candy in the car and said it would help me play my cello better, but it tasted bad and then I got sleepy. Hannah went very still. She did not let it show on her face. She had spent 6 years learning not to let things show on her face when a patient said something that mattered. She drew back gently, kept her voice light. A new doctor? When did you meet him, sweetheart? Right before my lesson, Elias said, blinking up at her, innocent as morning. Mr. Gregory said he was a special doctor for kids. He had a candy. It was supposed to make me better at music. He frowned, but it just made me feel sick. The pieces came together in Hannah's mind with a speed that made her dizzy, because 3 days earlier, before any of this, she'd been pulling an overtime shift down in the ER when a man in a beautiful charcoal suit had come in with a colleague. And she remembered a younger, harder man with a chemical sharpness to him, a smell she'd filed away as some kind of solvent. He'd had a long, pale scar running across the back of his right hand, the kind you don't forget, and he'd been irritated and impatient and gone before she could place why he set her teeth on edge. The man in the charcoal suit beside him had been tall and silver-haired and very, very calm. Gregory Hale, the almond smell, the poison. The man who had walked a stranger past every guard in the house because no guard on earth would stop the consigliere. The traitor wasn't out in the city. He was sitting 20 feet below her, at the right hand of the most dangerous man in Chicago, polishing his glasses. Hannah's whole body went cold. She stood, and she took the boy's hand, and she kept her voice as steady as she had the night she'd knelt in the snow. Ilias, I need you to go with these 2 gentlemen back to your room, okay? And I need you to stay there with the door locked, and not open it for anyone except your dad. Can you do that for me? It's important. The guards, reading the change in her instantly, swept the boy away without a word. She didn't wait. She went down the great curving staircase on bare, silent feet, her heart hammering, because the one thing she understood was that she had to reach Damon before Gregory Hale realized a child had just talked. She hit the bottom of the stairs and shoved through the heavy doors of the study and walked straight into a room full of armed men, and she didn't slow down. Damon stood at the tall windows with his back to her, looking out at the gray lake. Gregory Hale sat at the desk, unhurried, leafing through a folder of papers, the picture of a loyal old friend handling a family's affairs. Sal Moretti stepped into her path, a hand drifting toward his jacket. Who let her down here? Stand down, Sal. Damon turned. He took in her bare feet, her white face, her wide eyes. What is it, Hannah? It's him. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed it directly across the room at Gregory Hale. The silence dropped like a blade. Gregory looked up from his papers with an expression of mild fatherly concern. My dear girl, he said, the warmth in his voice perfectly calibrated. I'm afraid the strain of these last few days has gotten the better of you. Damon, perhaps she should rest. She's not confused, Hannah said, stepping toward Damon, the words pouring out of her now. Elias just told me everything, he said. Mr. Gregory introduced him to a new doctor right before his lesson. A man who smelled like bitter almonds. A man who gave him a candy and told him it would help his music. Her voice gained iron with every word. And 3 days ago, before any of this happened, that same man was in my ER. He came in with Gregory. I served them both. The man who smelled like almonds had a long scar across the back of his right hand. I remember it because it made my skin crawl and I didn't know why. Damon Castellano did not move. The air in the room went lethal. Gregory rose smoothly from the chair, adjusting his cuffs with the calm of a man who had talked his way out of worse rooms than this. Damon, you've known me your entire life. Your father trusted me with everything he built. You are going to take the word of a hysterical hospital nurse over 40 years of loyalty. Damon didn't look at him. He turned his head a few degrees toward Sal. The gate logs, he said quietly. 3 days ago, the afternoon. Did Gregory bring a guest onto these grounds? Sal already had the tablet out, his thumbs moving fast, and Hannah watched the color leave his face. Boss. A contractor's vehicle, cleared through the gate at 2:10 that afternoon. Authorized personally by Mr. Hale. The driver's ID, he looked up. It's flagged. Known associate of the Morettis. And the photo, scar across the back of the right hand. Gregory Hale's composure finally broke. He bolted for the door. But he was a 63-year-old lawyer, and Sal Moretti was the most dangerous enforcer in the organization, and Gregory made it 3 steps before he was driven to the floor and pinned, his silver hair falling across his face, his elegant suit rucked up around his shoulders. "Why?" Damon said. He didn't shout. He walked toward the pinned man slowly, and the quiet, terrible stillness was back, worse than any scream. 40 years, you held me at my christening. Why?" Gregory spat blood onto the marble and looked up at him with 40 years of buried contempt finally surfacing. "Because you've gone soft, Damon. Your father was a king. You cancel deals because a child has a music recital. You let that boy make you weak. The Morettis came to me with a seat at the table, and all I had to do was take your heir off the board and let grief do the rest. The commission would have voted you out within the year. You were never fit to wear what your father wore." Damon reached down, took a fistful of the expensive charcoal lapel, and hauled the old man to his feet so they were eye to eye. "You carried poison into my house," he said, his voice dropping to almost nothing, his eyes gone black. "You put it in my son's mouth, and you watched him get in the car. You want to know what makes me dangerous, Gregory?" It was never the crown. His grip tightened. "It's what I do to anyone who touches my family. Sal, take him downstairs, and get the Moretti boss on the line. Tell him his new partner is about to start sending him a very long message." They dragged the screaming old man out, and the heavy doors boomed shut, and the room fell back into a silence that rang. Hannah stood frozen in the middle of it, shaking, her arms wrapped around herself. She had just watched the polished surface peel back to show the raw and bloody machine underneath, and she understood at last exactly what kind of world she had wandered into. Damon turned to her. The murderous cold drained slowly out of his face and left behind something heavier, a deep, scraped bare exhaustion. He crossed to a cabinet, poured 2 glasses of something amber, and put one in her hand. "Drink," he said, "not as an order this time. You've earned it twice over." She took a small swallow and let it burn the chill out of her chest. "You saved him twice," Damon said, leaning back against the desk, watching her with something that was no longer suspicion. Once in the snow, and once just now from the thing that was hiding inside his own home. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people I pay to protect this family. A stranger I dragged in off the street did more in 3 days than any of them. I just pay attention," Hannah said, staring into the glass. "I notice things. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. It's the whole job. Your job," Damon said, "is finished." He pulled a thick cream envelope from the desk drawer and held it out. "Hale's people tore your apartment apart looking for a drive they thought my son might have slipped into his bag. They found nothing, because there was nothing. But because of me, your life is gone. So I'm giving you a new one." She opened it with unsteady hands. Inside was the deed to a restored brownstone in Lincoln Park, a cashier's check with so many zeros the number stopped meaning anything, and a clean, legitimate identity in her own name. "I can't take this," she breathed, trying to push it back at him. This is a fortune. This is too much. It's a fraction of what my son's life is worth," Damon said, and he closed her fingers gently around the envelope, refusing to let her give it back. "You're under my protection now, Hannah Vale. With this, you can go anywhere in the world. Start over. Never worry about a landlord or a heating bill or a locked door again. You'd be safe, and you'd be free, and you'd never have to see any of this again." He paused, and the gray of his eyes searched hers, and the strange electric thing that had been building between them since a snowy doorway cracked quietly open in the silent room. Or, Hannah said, and found she'd forgotten how to breathe. "Or you stay." His voice had gone low and rough. "There's a boy upstairs who's asked about you every hour since he woke up. This is a dark place, Hannah, I won't pretend otherwise. But 3 nights ago, you walked into the worst moment of my life, and you were the only light in it. And I've spent every day since trying to think of a single reason to let that walk back out my door. I haven't found one." Hannah looked down at the deed in her hand, the ticket to the safe, ordinary life she'd always told herself she wanted. Then she looked up at the man in front of her, terrifying, ruthless, and standing there more uncertain than she'd have believed possible. And she thought of a small boy's arms around her neck, and she thought of how she'd never once, in 26 years, felt like she truly belonged anywhere. The world had never offered her clean choices. Maybe it never would. Sometimes getting out of the cold meant walking straight toward the fire. She set the envelope down on the desk, unopened, and she met Damon Castellano's eyes without flinching, the same way she had in a hospital waiting room when she had nothing left but her nerve. "I've never been afraid of the dark," she said. "So tell me, if it had been you walking home that night, frozen and broke, and 11 days from Christmas, would you have stopped for that gasp in the doorway? Or would you have kept your head down and walked on by like everyone else? Because the line between an ordinary life and a world like this one is thinner than any of us wants to believe. And sometimes it comes down to a single sound on an empty street. If this story pulled you in, do me a favor and let me know in the comments what you would have done. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next one is even darker, and you are not going to want to miss who walks through the door."